Daniel Hudson Burnham was born in the town of Henderson, New York in 1846. The son of a merchant, his father moved the family to Chicago when Daniel was 9 in search of better business opportunities. It was there that Burnham watched his father rise from a meager drug wholesaler to eventually become the president of the Chicago Mercantile Association. This success story, paired with an air of opportunity found throughout the city and country at the time, would radically shape Daniel for the rest of his life, instilling in him a deep sense of ambition that would guide him throughout his career. The Midwestern culture in which he was raised, Swedenborgian by religion, would also play a pivotal role in Daniel's life by placing a strong ethical focus on service and contribution to the greater good. When it came to formal education, Daniel often found his attention elsewhere, focused on hobbies like drawing, which his parents supported by paying for private lessons. Though in school, Daniel remained popular among classmates and teachers thanks to his impressive stature and natural sociability. After failing college entrance exams at Yale and Harvard, Burnham put his drawing skills to use, working as a drafting apprentice at the Loring and Jenney firm in Chicago. In a letter at the time, he expressed faith that he would one day become the greatest architect in the country. Ever restless, though, he left for Nevada shortly after to try his hand at other work, including silver prospecting and politics. Ultimately failing, he returned to Chicago at age 24 and was given a job at the Carter, Drake, and White firm, where he went on to meet his most famous partner, a man named John Root. Root, a well-trained and studious professional, was precisely the complement Burnham needed at the time, and in 1873, the two split off to open their own architecture practice. Despite getting off to a rocky start, their firm arose during an unprecedented period of growth in the city, 2 years after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, and was ideally poised to lead the city's early skyscraper boom. Between 1880 and 1890, Chicago's population doubled from 500,000 to over 1 million residents. Around the same time, improvements in the mass production of steel had recently contributed to the city gaining status as the United States Heartland Rail Hub, while increasing land rents, coupled with new technologies like steel framing and electric elevators, drove architects to pursue new heights in construction. At the firm, Root handled the details on paper, while Burnham used his natural sociability to court and determine the needs of clients, drafting plans for the layout of each site. Between the years 1873 and 1891, the pair executed designs for roughly 175 residential and 100 commercial projects, including the 10-story Montauk Building and the Rand McNally Building, which in 1890 was the first ever to be supported entirely by steel framing. All the while, Burnham remained active in professional organizations across the city, helping to create the Western Association of Architects in 1884. This work garnered him such a reputation that, in 1890, he and Root were made consulting architects for the upcoming Columbian Exposition of 1893, with Burnham also being named Director of Works in charge of design, engineering, and construction. Burnham's role in the fair would prove to be one of the most influential of his life, shaping him perhaps as much as he shaped it. Wanting to make the exposition a national event, Burnham assisted in the recruitment of architects from across the country and used clever advertising tactics like beautifully illustrative paintings and stories to attract public attention. In response to negative sentiment toward American cities at the time, the design of the event was set to be a combination of European-inspired neoclassical and Beaux Arts styles. As the United States had grown rapidly in wealth and prominence during the 19th century, the cultural elite, increasingly able to tour European cities, felt shame at the filthy and disorganized conditions of American cities like Chicago. The architecture of the fair was an expression of a newly discovered faith in the ability of beautiful environments to inspire civic virtue, the core philosophy of the City Beautiful movement. While Burnham was not the originator of these ideas, his status as the exposition's leader earned him much of the credit for the success of the fair and its exquisitely planned White City. In subsequent years, he received honorary degrees from Harvard, Yale, and Northwestern University, and was made president of the American Institute of Architects. After the event, Burnham's professional focus increasingly turned from architecture toward public work and city planning. Regarded nationally as a powerful figure, he was chosen for yet another life-altering opportunity in 1901, as chair of the Macmillan Commission, a three-man ensemble tasked with revamping the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Burnham's innate ambition quickly came to show in his design for the site. Believing the capital would grow rapidly in the following years, he organized an extended trip across Europe to gather inspiration from many of the same aristocratic cities the Founding Fathers had looked to a century earlier. During visits to places like Paris, London, Vienna, Rome, and Berlin, the group held no actual meetings with European planners, but acquired a preference for the logic, magnificence, and formality of Grand Manor design. It is said that Burnham's first view of Paris was from above, on a balcony overlooking the city. This experience left a lasting impression on his planning work, resulting in his view of cities as a single unit composed of many interrelated systems. The Commission's inspiration from this trip was evidenced heavily throughout their Macmillan Plan of 1901, with tree-lined boulevards throughout and a Versailles-like diamond spanning from the White House to the Capitol. A Greek Parthenon-inspired memorial for President Lincoln was also erected at a site Burnham himself selected. Despite the plan's expense, its immediate popularity quickly earned Burnham work on other plans in Cleveland and San Francisco. He was even hired by the U.S. government to lay out plans for Manila and Bacau in the American-occupied Philippines. His most impressive plan, and one of the most comprehensive of its time, however, came in 1909 back in his home of Chicago. Extending more than 60 miles and including a wide range of components like greenbelts, a massive domed city hall, and a central plaza surrounded by white colonnaded public buildings, the plan embodied what the Columbian Exposition had promised years earlier. Yet, while many individual components of Burnham's plan were later built, his final project represented, in many ways, the pinnacle of the City Beautiful movement. In 1912, during what would be his final tour to Europe, Daniel Burnham died in Heidelberg, Germany, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire architects and city planners for generations to come. The decades following the Columbian Exposition saw a resurgence in neoclassical design across Europe and its many distant colonial possessions. The influence of Burnham's grandiose schemes would span the political spectrum, appealing to dictators and democratic leaders alike. In Nazi Germany, Hitler found inspiration in them for his mammoth world capital at Germania, seeing monumental architecture as a way to claim legitimacy for his regime. In the democratic world, leaders saw City Beautiful themes like order and beauty as tools for instilling rationality and pride in their citizens' lives, two characteristics necessary for a people meant to rule. These ideas were incorporated into numerous capital cities, including New Delhi in India and Australia's brand new federal capital at Canberra in 1912. Closer to home, U.S. architects applied neoclassical ideology when determining the appropriate relationships between buildings and public space. Civic centers built in the years immediately following Burnham's death are still regarded as many of the country's most beautiful, with their stereotypically symmetrical facades, Greek-inspired columns, and orientations around carefully landscaped central plazas. Small elements of Burnham's influence can even be seen here at our own governmental mall in Phoenix. Ironically, though, it wasn't beauty that Burnham sought most in his work. To him, beauty was a byproduct of order and efficiency, and his ultimate vision was a perfectly ordered place, something he called the well-articulated city. Some argue today that Burnham never even associated himself with the City Beautiful school of planning. Whether or not this is true, his work was undoubtedly instrumental in popularizing the movement, and it helped to establish planning as a field in its own right. Given the lasting impact of his work on architecture and city structure in the United States, it is not a stretch to say that Daniel Burnham is and will remain one of the most famous and influential city planners in American history.